Kevin said, why don't we do it almost a cappella, using totally, for the backing track, totally voices, all voices, not Beach Boys type of voices, just a wall of sound. I said, yeah, and how are we going to do that? And it was Lowell who came up with the idea of making tape loops that we could run ad infinitum, forever. We'd just run them. So we spent another 3 weeks then recording 3 guys, Kev, Lowell and Graham, just singing "Ah" in the studio onto the 16-track machine. Each note had 16 tracks of 3 people, if you've got your calculator there, and we had to record a chromatic scale of 12 voices that would fit any chord in the song. We put the tape loops around this Stewart stereo machine and then out to mic stands with little rollers on the top, so the tape would run through there and we could tension the machine properly. Then I fed across to the 16-track machine and filled each of the 12 tracks with a separate note of these masked vocals. So I think eventually there were 256 voices on these tracks. And at the same time, we'd recorded a very, very simple backing track, stereo backing track, with me on electric piano, little rhythm guitar, and Kevin playing a bass drum on a Moog synthesizer, just to follow it.
I'm not in love, so don't forget it. It's just a silly phase I'm going through.
The 4 of us actually got around the control desk and started to feed the chords as they were changing within the song, up and down with the faders. And whilst we were doing that, I'd locked all the faders with a piece of gaffer tape, so they're all around about minus 24 on the faders. But because it was a chromatic scale, there was this lovely sort of hissing, breathy sound, like when you walk in a concert hall and people are just talking very quietly, but there's this wonderful hiss.
All of which probably explains why nothing had ever sounded quite like that record before, had it?
It was a milestone in recording. The production was absolutely beautiful, and the process that they went through to create this epic record was incredible, bearing in mind the time. This is 34 years ago that this record was made. So a lot of the techniques that were used on this record were done for the very, very first time, especially the vocals. Now, as Eric mentioned, the vocals were recorded individually across the 16 tracks and then bounced down. Now luckily, at the very, very front of this multitrack, there's the remnants of one of the tracks. So this is actually what one of the multi-tracked voice loops actually sounded like. So if I isolate that first, and that very slight blip you can hear, that's where the splice would have been in the loop. So although you can actually hear the loop as it goes through with the splice point, in this case, when you had the other 11 added, all at different splice points, the loop point would have been inaudible. So now if we start the actual multitrack up, you can hear what Eric was talking about, this sound that does sound like you're entering a cathedral or some hallowed space. And what we're hearing is a result of them playing the mixing console as if it was a keyboard come instrument. So each fader had one particular note on it. So putting, say, 3 or 4 faders up would create a chord. And as they knew what the chord progression of the song was, they could go through it bit by bit. They could, of course, drop in and out of the stereo track that I'm now playing to correct any errors in their mixing. So this final track is a result of all those man-hours of work. It's absolutely beautiful. The other addition is that there's a second track of the same thing but played at half speed, so that creates this low octave. This is particularly noticeable on the bit where it goes ha-ha, ha-ha. And you can hear both the high original pitched vocals and the low octave vocals.
So Eric's using his half-speed trick again, which he obviously likes. I don't remember another record that starts off with the vocals being produced and then you playing along with it. But this seems to have started with just the vocals.
That's right, they created a guide backing track just to make sure they mixed the vocals in the right sections with the right balances. But once they had their correct vocal track, they then proceeded in the control room, which creates a very, very different atmosphere, played in the control room the rest of the instruments, the Fender Rhodes, the electric guitar, and curiously, no drums. This bass drum was actually created by a Moog synthesizer. Now, Lol had one of the very first Moog synthesizers in the country, and he'd learnt how to program it, so he was able to create this unusual, soft bass drum sound, which Kevin played, being the drummer, throughout the song. In fact, a real drum kit would have been overpowering on this record, so it suits the subtlety of the backing track. So you're right that they played along to a pre-recorded ooh backing track, which is unusual. So once they got the backing track to their satisfaction, they then subsequently overdubbed in the traditional sense. So, for example, the other backing vocals were sung to a finished track. So let me isolate those first of all.
It's because ooh, you wait a long time for me. Ooh, you wait a long time. Ooh, you wait a long time for me.
Now, there are many things on this record that people will be so familiar with, and I think one of the most familiar things is the spoken voice. The only time that there's not a 10cc person on this record. Now, this is Kathy, the studio secretary, and once again, to make my job easy, Eric has recorded the effects on Kathy's voice. So what you're hearing is exactly as Eric recorded it, including the fact that it fades out as it loops round.
Be quiet. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry.
Oh, good grief.
I hate you! I hate you! Alex! I hate you! And if you were such a great mother, how come your kids dropped out of school and ran away, huh? Alex!
Oh, hey! Big boys don't cry.
So that's Kathy with the nice voice.
And it is so integral to the record, you can't imagine that not being on there. And just a great production trick. Now, talking of things that are not on there, there's one part of Eric's lead vocal that never made it to the final record, and luckily they never erased it. So here is an alternative lead vocal at the bridge section. Now, when they came to mix the record, or just before they came to mix the record, Lowell had suggested that they didn't really like that section, so he played the melody on a piano, and that's actually what's on the finished record. But at the same point on another track is Eric's original vocal with some other lyrics.
What we can, do what we must.
This is probably the first time this has ever been heard outside of the studio, and probably for 34 years. So is that a case of we are so familiar with the finished record that by now hearing that section it sounds out of place? Had we grown up with that part, maybe we'd have got used to it.
Any other little tricks and surprises you've discovered?
Yes, this little sounds interesting. This is a music box, and there's 2 tracks of it. It was double-tracked. Again, it's another one of those little production tricks that maybe not so familiar to everybody first time on listening, but now I'm pointing it out to you. I think if you listen to the record again, it'll be very familiar.
How did they do that then?
They told me that it was one of those toy music boxes on a string that you pulled to make it play its little tune, and then by double-tracking it, it creates this very slightly strange Doppler effect. Plus there's a lot of echo and effects added to it, which creates this sort of somewhat surreal sound. It fits so well in the track.
Be quiet. Big boys don't cry.
Are you crazy? Are you any more?
Not in Love was presented with 3 Ivor Novello Awards: Best Pop Song, International Hit of the Year, and Most Performed British Work.
If you have to prove your manhood, get somebody your own age. Shut up! Oh, what's the matter with you? What's the matter with you, doctor? Ever try getting your kicks with a woman? Shut up, Mom! How about taking me on, or is that too frightening for you?
You lonely, Mom? You want him?
To date, the song's been heard on American radio over 3 million times. And if our calculations are correct, if we allow a full running time of 6 minutes per play and we run those plays back to back, it would be roughly the equivalent of 34 years of airtime for a single released in May 1975.
Just a silly phase I'm going through, and just because I call you up, don't get me wrong, don't think you've got it made. No, it's because I'd like to see you, but then again, it doesn't mean that much to me. So if I call you, don't make a fuss. Don't tell your friends about the two of us. I'm not in love, no, it's
That's all right. I'll have a pint.
Why not?
All right. Why not?
Good to see you both.
Thank you.
What made you decide to re-release it? It was such a mega hit 20 years ago.
We actually recorded we were having a feature done on us by another TV channel, and they said come into the studio and do as if you're just doing Not in Love and a sort of an acoustic version.
Right.
We did it. It was being recorded in a proper studio, and we went back into the control room and listened to it, and everyone said, "This is fantastic. You've got to put it out." So it was totally unplanned.
Such a beautiful song. Did you write it?
We both wrote it.
You both wrote it together. Yeah.
Was it plucked purely out of your songwriter's skill, or was it based on any kind of student experience or?
It's a nice little romantic story behind it, actually, for Valentine as well. Yeah. My wife Gloria used to say to me, "Why don't you say I love you? Why don't you keep saying I love you?" And at the time, a silly phase I was going through, I said, if you keep saying it, it's not going to be worth the same each time you say I love you, it won't mean the same. So I mentioned this to Graham. We wanted to write a love song. I said, well, let's write one called I'm Not in Love. Yeah. But then give all the reasons why you were in love without saying it. And that's how it came about.
Heavy sarcasm.
Which actually informed much of the songwriting of 10cc in those early days. A lot of wit and irony.
Well, I think we always tried to amuse ourselves first and foremost. Right. We had a pretty wacky sense of humour.
Which band were you writing about in Old Wild Men?
That was actually Kevin Lowell wrote that song, and they were just thinking about people like what Eric Clapton would be like in 50 years' time.
Or the Stones or whatever.
Yeah. Well, the Stones probably as they are now.
It was an extraordinary time, all that, wasn't it? I mean, especially in Manchester. And it's Manchester again now for the rock scene. But I mean, there were the Hollies, Herman's Hermits, and you used to write for all of them, didn't you?
Graham wrote a lot for them.
Yes, wrote a lot for the Hollies and the Hermits, and there's actually a big reunion tour going around now, I believe.
There is,
with people like Wayne Fontana, Freddie and the Dreamers, and the Hermits. It's great.
If you hadn't split up, 10cc hadn't split up, which, I mean, you haven't in a sense because you carry on, under the name, but if the original band had stayed together, I mean, you were mega then, do you think you would have been now, I mean, still a major supergroup, the huge tours, everybody waiting every 3 years for the new album, the whole thing?
I think we would.
I do too. It's a really question because
I think the band was quite unique at the time because you had 4 people in the band who were all capable of writing and singing a #1 record, and we did. I don't think there's any other band in history, in Britain anyway, that had that capability.
Were all or any of you graduates?
Kevin and Lowell were.
College of Art, Birmingham College of Art.
There's a lot of intelligence in the lyrics.
A lot of artistic, arty things in them. Audio pictures.
So when is this really? Unfortunately, it's not being released in time for Valentine's Day, is it? Because it's the perfect song.
To be. Yeah, it's supposed to be. Yeah, Valentine's Day, but it might not be in the shop on the day. But that was the release date we planned
certainly this month, anyway.
Yes, and also actually this is a forerunner to our a new album that we've got out, which has got all totally new material that we've just finished. That's coming out in the spring. An album that's called Mirror Mirror.
Mirror.
That'll be. That's a few weeks off yet.
That was absolutely live. No miming there. You were singing and playing as well. How does the actual single, the release, sound? Does it sound very like that? Is it?
It's just the same.
You kind of hit it really.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Right. I love the use of the acoustic guitar in it there.
Yeah.
It gives it a melody. It is different.
Yes.
Very romantic.
That's a terrific song.
We like it.
Thank you. Well,
stay around, have pink champagne at the end of the program.
If you don't mind.
I promise everybody.
It really is good to see you. Honestly,
thank you.
Fantastic singing for Princess Line. It was great. Well, especially this time of the morning.
Just a silly phase I'm going through, and just because I call you up, don't get me wrong, don't think you got it made. I'm not in love, no, tell your friends about the two of us. I'm not in love, no, no. Upon the wall, it hides a nasty stain that's lying there. So don't you ask me to give it back. I know you know it doesn't mean that much to me. I'm not in love, no, no. So don't forget it. It's just a silly phase I'm going through. Just because I call you up, don't get me wrong, don't think you got it made. I'm not in love.
Sounds terrific. Hi there. Good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I must say that song is still played endlessly, of course, so it's very good to hear it performed live. But what's the story behind it?
What, recording it live again?
No, just actually the original song.
I had a person who is very dear to me, and so very dear to me, who used to say to me, why do you not say I love you every day, you know? I said, well, I think it's a bit silly saying I love you every day because it loses its meaning. So I mentioned this to Graham, and we were thinking about writing a love song at the time. So we said, well, why don't we write a song called I'm Not in Love, but give you all the reasons why I'm still totally in love with you. So once it clicked in that way, we wrote it very quickly.
And so I should actually say Eric Stewart, of course, and Graham Gouldman as two of 10cc, and there have been so many changes over the years, I'm not really going to go into all of that. But Graham, bearing in mind the history of the song,
yes.
And the fact that it has been so popular over the years, so why then was it decided to re-record and re-release it?
Well, we have an album coming out in March, and we did a feature for another TV programme, and they asked us to go into a studio, sort of like a little documentary on 10cc, and sing I'm Not in Love. And while we were being filmed, it was actually being recorded as well. We went back into the control room and listened to it, and it just sounded so great that everybody said, you know, you should put this out as a single. And that is what's going to happen on March the 6th.
And I know actually that in recent times you've been on a tour to Japan, and that was fantastic, and then toured the UK. But people still tend to say, where have they been? Where have they been for these 10 years? So what was it like going back on stage to perform live, literally having been off stage for a while?
Very nerve-wracking, incredibly nerve-wracking. It always is, no matter how many times you do it. Still get that real adrenaline rush. And I suppose that's one of the beauties of doing it. Without that, you'd get bored with it.
Yeah, but where were you then? Were you just writing and doing...
No, recording with other people, producing with other people. I worked on 3 albums with McCartney. Graham worked a lot with Andrew Gold. We were producing people like Sat Cafe, Agnetha from ABBA, real cross-section of people. But we were basically studio-born anyway, so production was one of our our main reasons for existing. So we passed all this sort of stuff on to other people for 10 years and then came back.
You know, Paul McCartney just slips it in, doesn't he? 3 records with Paul McCartney. And in fact, Paul McCartney's on the new album, isn't he? Is he playing on one of the tracks?
Yes, he's playing on 2 of the tracks, actually. And one of the tracks, called Yvonne's the One, we co-wrote a couple of years back.
So, I mean, so you talk very casually about that and working with all those people, you know. But does it not seem weird in a way, having McCartney play on your tracks? And
it's lovely. I mean, it's great to have that sort of talent come and play on something you've written. They add another element to it that you wouldn't think of yourself, and that's what genius is. And these guys, like Paul, are pure genius.
This is the first time we've ever actually really collaborated with other people as well. Yeah. With also people like with Andrew, as Eric said, and Tim Rice has written the lyrics for one of the songs. It's given a sort of new dimension to what we do.
And of course, Graham, you have performed with Andrew Gold a lot.
That's right.
Do you still actually do that?
We still write together, and probably always will, but we had a few good years in the 80s.
I think that's where it probably gets a bit confusing, because you've all individually done so many things with other people, and yet you still, in a way, have all stayed together.
Well, I think 10cc is like the one constant in our lives. I mean, we might well go off and do other things at other times, but it's so nice to come back together and sing, you know, songs together like I'm Not in Love.
Just remind some of the groups that you've been with, both of you been with over the years.
Going right back to the past. Well, Jerry Lee and the Staggerlees, the Emperors of Rhythm, the Emperors of Rhythm, Johnny Peters and the Cresters, the Mindbenders, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders,
Hot Legs.
Sabres,
Hot Legs.
Hot Legs. Oh yes, Hot Legs, of course. I'm the Neanderthal Man.
While Eric was in all these bands, I was writing songs for people like Herman's Hermits, the Yardbirds, and the Hollies in the 60s. And then Eric and I met up in the late 60s and really started working together then.
What do you think generally of modern songs? I mean, do you think it maybe is the time for really good lyrics again, that there's an appreciation for them?
Yeah, there's a big sort of gap in the market. I think there's some fantastic girl singers around at the moment doing really beautiful, strong ballads. But there seems to be a big gap in the market for the sort of songs that 10cc would do. As Graham was saying, when we write songs, many of them are not really recordable by other people, like Life as a Minestrone or Dreadlock Holiday. They're not the sort of songs you can sell to other people. They don't want them. But they seem to fit what we do. So there's a gap, I feel, in the market that we're absolutely suited for.
And so with the new album, Mirror Mirror, it's going to be all new songs, and
yes.
What a blend of material.
Yeah, good cross-section of reggae, ballads, heavy rock, blues, acoustic, anything.
Well, I know you're going to be playing for us later on in the programme. I do hope that you've sent your respectives now flowers for Valentine's Day, have you?
Yes. They arrived very early this morning, I believe.
Yes. Well, you had to, because you're at the studio here for about 8 o'clock.
That's right.
In the moment, anyway. Eric and Graham, thank you very much. 10cc.
Thank you. Thank you.